All right. Hi, everyone. This is Allison with the Gallatin County Democrats. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the executive director of the Gallatin County Democrats, like I said. And I am very excited to be live streaming this conversation. We've been slowly easing our way into getting used to sending more communications out about what's going on in the Montana Legislature. And today I am joined by Representative Jim Hamilton from House District 61 and Senator Pat Flowers from Senate District 32. I did get that right, correct? It is 32.
Correct.
I never get the three Senate districts. I never get right. Anyway, we are going to chat about what happened this week with the legislature, particularly the rules committees that met on Monday and Tuesday. So with that, Jim, what happened on Monday and Tuesday? What was the conversation?
Well, let me start with a base so people understand a little bit about what the process was. There's a joint rules committee which met on Monday. Joint rules is a combination of everybody on the House Rules Committee and everybody on the Senate Rules Committee. So it's just a combining of the two committees. That continued into Tuesday morning for a little bit for some unknown reason. And although we did have a little bit of discussion, I guess. And then in the afternoon, or later in the morning, actually, on Tuesday and into the afternoon, the Senate Rules Committee, which Pat's on, met separately from the House Rules Committee. So that's sort of the setting. And the first step in the process at the Joint Rules Committee was to adopt the joint rules or to pass a resolution. I'm saying that poorly, to introduce a resolution to accept the rules from the 2019 session. The rules can only go from the time they're adopted to the end of the biennium. And at that point, we have no rules unless we adopt new ones. So in this case, it's sort of the first step to say, okay, let's start with this as our base, and then we'll do amendments.
Got it. Okay.
And I think Pat can add more to that, what we did next after that.
Sure. Thanks, Jim. That's a good framework. So then the process is to introduce amendments to the rules. And those are submitted typically prior to when the committee meets. And so we had a list of rules that if you were there in person, they were passed out, or most of them were, and you had the opportunity to review them ahead of time. And then those legislators that sponsored the rules had the opportunity to, or that sponsored the amendments had the opportunity to introduce the amendments and describe kind of what the intent was. And so we went through that for, I don't know, we probably had 15 different rules, but there were, in my estimation, really 4 key rules, 1 Republican and 3 that were introduced by the 3 different Democrats on the Joint Rules Committee.
You know, something.
Go ahead.
Sorry to talk over you there, Pat. Something that was different from this time, from previous times that we've done this or previous committee meetings, was we were having, for those who were trying to watch it at home, we were having problems with the amendment drafter software. And so the amendments really didn't even get to us until very shortly before the meeting. I think we might have had them Sunday night. Maybe it was Saturday night, I can't remember which. But not nearly the amount of time you would ordinarily have to look at them. So the public also didn't get to look at them. Okay. So that was a quirk that we were dealing with. The other quirk we were dealing with is that the decision had been made by the leadership to propose this resolution to adopt the old rules and then immediately go to public comment. So no amendment had been proposed, no discussion about what the changes might be or why we were even really adopting this resolution before they opened up the mic for the public. Well, it's a little bit like me saying, well, what did you think about that television show? If you didn't know what the show was, you didn't even get to watch it.
Right. So cart before the horse.
I think it was out of order, and they kept insisting it's the way we always do things. But it's not. I've never seen it done that way in any committee I've ever been in.
No. Typically a sponsor will introduce a bill, and then they'll allow for public comment and then questions from the committee and then go on. But yeah, that didn't work.
Okay. So what were the amendments that were proposed and discussed after public comment?
Jim, do you want to cover the Republican?
Why don't you touch on the 4 that you thought were most important?
Okay. The 4 that I thought were most important was in the kind of go in the order that they were presented. The first was introduced by Republican Senator Jason Ellsworth, who's the president pro tem in the Senate this year. And he introduced the concept. He actually read the full length of the bill, which is about 5 pages long. So it was a long presentation. And it introduces the concept of a COVID response panel. And that panel would consist of legislative leadership, which is in this case identified as the Senate President, the Senate President pro tem, the Senate Majority Leader, Senate Minority Leader, Speaker of the House pro tem, House Majority Leader, and House Minority Leader. So there would be 6 Republicans and 2 Democrats on that committee based on that configuration. And they would, develop some kind of protocol for how they're going to operate. They would elect their own leadership within that group, and that they could meet throughout the session as needed. And I guess to just characterize the general notion without getting into all the excruciating detail that's in this bill, the intent is to be able to have a bipartisan committee, such as it is, that addresses kind of changes in the health threat of COVID and how it relates to the workings of the legislature, and to do that on a kind of situational basis. So as things change, that the committee can meet and hopefully be responsive and make changes as needed in our proceedings and how we conduct our proceedings in the legislature in order to address the risk. So I won't comment on that concept at this point, other than to just say that's the concept.
Can I comment?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I didn't want to bias my presentation, but go ahead.
You were being, I'll be the biased one. You can be the nonpartisan. Okay. You were being so polite and kind. Repeatedly in the presentation, this was pointed out as we're just concerned about your health, and we're going to set up this panel made up of the leadership, and the leadership, of course, is mostly just concerned about your health, and this is not a political issue. But I would point out that, as Pat very kindly, politely said, tactfully said, this is a committee 6-2 Republican. This is in fact, in my view of it, this is more political than any other body that we have at the legislature. In the past, we created a harassment and discrimination policy, I think going into the 2019 session. That was equally weighted, House and Senate, Democrat and Republican. So objections came up after this bill, and particularly on this segment, saying, well, if you really think this is nonpartisan, then make the panel nonpartisan. Right. And that was met with enormous reluctance and out and out rejection, I would say.
Okay. It also feels very reactive rather than proactive to me.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was one of my biggest concerns about this, was exactly that. because the reality is we are in the crisis now,
Right.
and we need a plan now to deal with the inherent risks that we're all facing when we walk out the door, and certainly when we walk in the halls of the Capitol. And this presumes, the way in my mind, the way it reads, it presumes that, yeah, this is something that's on the horizon instead of here in front of us. So in that way, it really makes no sense to me. The idea of having, this is my opinion only, of having a, smaller group of legislative leadership that can meet quickly and respond to quickly changing circumstances related to the virus and how it's affecting the legislature, that piece makes sense to me, because it's very likely that circumstances will change. We could get a serious outbreak of infection in the legislature, or among lobbyists or whatever, that we need to react to, including maybe suspending the proceedings for a while until we can get that under control. So that piece of this concept makes sense. But to wait and not do anything or plan for based on what we know now seems out of line to me. At best.
The other thing I would point out is, even if this were a equally weighted bipartisan panel, it's unlike any other group that we have, in that there is no way to appeal decisions of this group. So, for example, if the group decided masks were not required any place in any public part of the Capitol by either legislators or the public, that, as written, would be the final word. With anything else in the legislature, if we don't like what the Speaker of the House says or the President of the Senate says, we can appeal that to a committee. And if that committee doesn't like it, we can appeal it to the full body. So there's always a process, democratic as it would appear, right, to appeal. But this has none of that. Sorry to interrupt you so much, Pat.
No, that's fine. That's helpful. So that, in a nutshell, is what the Republican caucus is kind of hanging their hat on as their fundamental approach to how we manage COVID and try and effectively run the legislative session. The Democrats introduced 3 separate amendments. The first amendment that we introduced would be to have a completely remote legislative session. We have the capability to do that. We've been conducting all of our interim meetings since probably June at least, if not before that, via Zoom. And it's worked reasonably well. There are some challenges to it, as anybody who's been on Zoom would recognize. And as Allison pointed out earlier, before we went online here, that it is really fatiguing to be on a Zoom meeting for, let's say, 8 hours, which I've done in one interim meeting. It's pretty, and I can't explain why, but it's exhausting. So there would be some challenges, but it's technically, we have the capability to do it. We've been working on it for the last 6 months. Staff has prepared us to be able to conduct a session that way. So we thought it made sense. It would be certainly the safest way. We would all be on equal footing as legislators, as lobbyists, as general public. And that, to me, is appealing also. So that was the first proposal we introduced. The second proposal or amendment we introduced was to delay the session until we had readily available vaccine. The notion there is we would have more assurance that if you were going to participate, either as a legislator or as a member of the public or a lobbyist, expert witness, you would have the opportunity to be vaccinated and have reasonable assurance that you would not contract COVID-19. So that was our second option. And then the third option, if neither one of those is acceptable, was to, at the very least, if we're going to conduct a face-to-face session, so to speak, that we apply all the public health guidelines that we've all been living with over the last 8 months or so. Things like wear a mask, socially distant, wash your hands. We employed temperature checks for folks coming into the building every day, into meetings. Kind of just the normal things we've all been doing and gotten used to, and that we've been told now by our public health officials are the best thing we can do to prevent the spread of the disease, and we think are the responsible things to do. In addition, we made it clear in that amendment that the public would be given the opportunity to participate remotely, as well as lobbyists and basically all interested parties would have full participation through remote means. The last item in that amendment is, I've lost it, but I'll think of it. But anyway, that's the thrust of that amendment. And the decision was made, I'm not sure we mentioned this at the outset in terms of framework, but the decision was made is that at this meeting on this past Monday, all we were going to do was present the amendments, provide some kind of brief comments to introduce, some brief questioning of the sponsor of the amendment, but not a lot of debate, and that we were going to delay any decisions until December 16th. And that's how it stands at this point.
Okay, so will there be debate and conversation around these proposed amendments, or will it just be a vote? Like, is there a chance for us now to weigh in now that there actually are proposed amendments where, the public can submit comment, or, on the 16th come and, testify to the Rules Committee? Is that a possibility at this point?
I think the answer to that is there are multiple answers. Right now, you can't find the amendments online. I looked this morning, and so the public couldn't even see them. They did list every amendment that was proposed, even if it was never introduced. So I think Pat was right. Is about 15, but about 4 or 5 of them didn't even get introduced. So the public at this point would not be able to tell which ones were introduced and which ones weren't. There was also a couple of conceptual amendments, which are not written down anywhere, but were mentioned over the rostrum. So what we have to wait for is step 1 for those to show up on the screen on the committee website.
Jim, if I could interrupt, I actually printed one out before we got online here, and I went to the House, Senate, and Joint Rules Committees page, and underneath on that page, underneath the 2021 House, Senate, and Joint Rules Committee, all the amendments are listed there. You just double click on the other underlined amendment and you can print them. And then on that same page is the opportunity to submit public comment.
Yeah, the point I was trying to make there, Pat, is that that's every amendment that was listed as possibly going to be proposed.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
And so the public can't tell from that which one was actually proposed and not proposed.
I see. Okay, sorry, I misunderstood.
Plus, a couple of those have been conceptually amended. So we're waiting, and hopefully that will be up there. Normally, we ask that happen 3 days ahead of time, which would mean over by the weekend.
Okay.
Maybe by Sunday or Monday. So if it runs as it did last time, the public would be able to make comments at the beginning. And hopefully the amendments would be visible for people by then. Okay. Once we enter executive action, which is when the motion is actually moved and seconded, are moved and discussed, I guess you might say, then there won't be a place for public comment.
Okay.
So the public comment could be about the resolution as is, or the amendments that we think will be proposed again or addressed at that meeting. And over on the House side now, it's a little bit different. And not to veer off of the joint rules, but the House rules were presented and discussed, and executive action was taken on them. So the House rules have allegedly, I'll call it, been adopted by the Rules Committee. And they said we will not necessarily have a meeting on the 16th, but if there's changes need to be made, or if they figure out something that's a problem, we could reopen. We've recessed until the 16th. We didn't adjourn.
Okay.
So that's a little much inside baseball, but.
Okay. So I want to come back to that because there's a rule that apparently now is in place in the House that I'd like us to talk about, which I'm sure you know which one I'm talking about. But what is there anything else with the Joint Rules Committee that we should be aware of? I'll pay attention so that when those amendments hopefully are posted to the website and there's time for public comment, and then making sure people are aware of when they can join the committee hearing, the committee meeting to submit public comment. But is there anything else that we should be aware of? Like, are you pretty much expecting that most COVID prevention isn't actually going to be approved for the joint rules? Like, are we kind of pessimistic about the outcome of on the 16th?
I think, and Pat, you certainly feel free to disagree with me, but I think the three proposals that the Democrats put forward were met in discussion with some disdain and comments like, it's just not necessary. We don't need to do that. If you don't want to be here, come and participate remotely, which is an issue that I would like to talk about with the joint rules. There is a section in the joint rules that does allow remote participation, clearly on the committee side. And in this amendment presented by Senator Ellsworth, he put in a section about participation during the session, which it would be the floor session in the Senate chambers or the House chambers, not committees. And here's the important section. A member's caucus leader may allow the member to participate remotely as provided in this rule and to vote by proxy, except as provided in subsection 2. Subsection 2 basically says voting by proxy in third reading. Now, third reading is the part where you actually pass the bill. That's sort of the final action, moving it on to the next House. Voting by proxy in third reading may be authorized by a member's caucus leader only when a member is hospitalized. Yes. Proxy voting on third reading is discouraged unless a member is physically present and participating in the session, or remotely present and participating in the session. So they made a big deal of this, that they would have to, they discovered the night before, they might have to pull this out because there might be some violation with the Constitution. In the Constitution, it requires a member to be present and voting. But I've spent a great deal of time today working on that phrase present, and there have been multiple definitions of what present meant in the past.
Okay.
So they are supposedly getting an attorney general opinion on that, the leadership of the Republican side, and will decide whether that's put into this amendment or not put into this amendment, hopefully before the 16th. So I think that's another thing to look out for, and that's Senate Joint Rule 150.
Okay. So it gets a little in the weeds as you know, with this stuff. I think we all, like, I certainly am learning, just anyone who's watching this right now, I am learning all of this with you all. Thank goodness we have our representatives and senators who are willing to help us understand this as we move through it. But it's in the weeds. Like, there's just so many little things, and I applaud all of your efforts for catching these and figuring out what the definition of present is, because that is important right now. Thank you. So, okay, so moving on to the House rules, I have a question. If they really have been officially adopted, one of the rules, from my understanding, is that a committee chair can decide in advance which bills are presented or introduced and which are not. And that has never been the case, correct?
That question, first of all, yes, that is, you have heard correctly about that.
Okay.
So the operative language is they wanted to change all bills shall be introduced to all bills may be introduced. And it's left with the discretion of the chair of the committee.
Subject to a vote after 2 weeks of the full committee, correct?
Well, a majority vote of the committee, there were actually two different amendments on that. So one of the amendments said a vote at any time by a majority of the committee. The other said it could be delayed as long as 2 weeks. So that's another part of this process of here we've got two conflicting amendments, and they need to be folded together somehow to be presentable to and to have the public comment on. However, it was directly asked of Todd Everts, the legislative attorney, has this not always been this way? I mean, wasn't this always the case? And he goes, no. Well, back to the early 90s, since the early 90s, it's been pretty clear that all bills assigned to a committee would be heard. Now, I know that's not true in 2017. There were some suspicious cases that bills took an awful long time to show up. But certainly in 19, it was part of our rules and very clear and adhered to. Mm-hmm. He was referring to prior to the early 90s, things were a little looser and committee chairs were given a lot more discretion than they have been since.
Okay.
So in modern times, let's call it, bills shall be introduced.
Okay. And why does this matter? Why is this a big deal?
Why would they want it that way? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. Or why might, at least for me personally, why I might be a little peeved about this.
Well, here would be my way of saying it. More than 50% of the voting population of Montana did not vote for the hard right. Okay. And this gives the hard right the opportunity to not hear any bill, not let any bill they choose become part of the light of day, because with maybe two exceptions, committee chairs in the House are all from the hard right caucus.
Got it.
So you're allowing a minority, this rule allows a minority to control the hearing of bills that might benefit the majority.
Okay.
And that's how it affects the people of Montana, which is the most important thing.
Right. Right.
I think a key kind of detail is that this was approved by the House Rules Committee, but these rules, just like the joint rules have to be approved by both the House and the Senate, Senate rules have to be then approved by the full Senate, House rules have to be approved by the full House before they are in force. So that is yet to happen, obviously.
Okay.
Thanks for reminding us about that, Pat. I was going to say that.
Yeah. So then I think I'm always going to come back to, okay, so what can we do? Like, how can we, influence or share our input and how we feel? Like, I mean, you are all elected by the people of Montana, and the people of Montana have a right to weigh in on how things are conducted, correct? And so what what can we do about these rules? Like, is this waiting? Is this sending an email or calling our specific representative and letting them know? Like, should we be targeted? Is there a group of individuals maybe we should think about? And if you don't know that like group, who that group is yet, that's okay. But like, this is just coming to my head as we're talking.
So there's really, if you, and we need this as background, there's really three groups in the legislature right now. Mm-hmm. On the Republican side, there's the hard right and what I call the three R's. Three R's are the reasonably responsible Republicans. Some people in the media know them as the Solutions Caucus, which I don't like the term. So, and then there's the Democrats. Mm-hmm. So Pat's right. We have to, once these are adopted at the Rules Committee, and highly likely they will be adopted at the Rules Committee, because the Rules Committee is stacked with, in the House, hard right folks. Mm-hmm. So they clearly have the majority there, they will pass them. Okay. So the chance to really change them or stop them, if that was a person's interest, would be on the floor. And all of the Democrats voted against the adoption of the House rules. So you already know you have all them. Right. So if you're really going to be effective, what you have to do is get to one of those other two groups and convince those people that they should vote against it. Okay. So I would say that there are two things. Number one, you would want to target probably the people who I would call the three R's. Now, they probably don't care much that somebody in Bozeman is calling them, telling them what to do. Mm-hmm. But if you have friends that live in their districts, that's a useful tool. Yep. And then the second thing is, as Pat said early on, your ability to appear before a hearing and have impact is gigantic at this moment because hardly anybody's doing it.
Right.
You know, where you might have 30 people testify on a bill when we're in person, you might have one testify about something this time. And so you can see how much more powerful your voice could be. Mm-hmm. And that's the whole committee has to hear that.
Got it. Okay.
It's still not that third group. I mean, really the two groups largely represented in rules are the Democrats and the hard right. Yeah. So you're still not quite getting to that third group. Mm-hmm. But I think that's how I would look at it. Pat, would you have other suggestions?
I agree completely.
Okay.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah. So then, Pat, so then these rules that have been proposed and the Rules Committee will vote next week on the 16th, and then both chambers have to formally adopt the rules. And will this be at the start of the session? So January 4th, is that the soonest that like it would happen?
You know, January.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Well, when she asked you, go ahead. I was
okay. I actually went back and looked at what happened in the last session, and the House adopted their rules on the 10th of January. The Senate formally adopted our rules on the 24th, I think. And then the joint rules actually weren't adopted until mid-February. Obviously, I think because of the circumstances surrounding COVID, I think that will be changed this year. And I think these rules are going to get addressed right up front. And the question was actually asked by one of the House members, what's the force of these rules if we adopt them in the Rules Committee and we decide, for example, that we're going to meet remotely? We can't impose these rules until they're adopted by the House and the Senate. My thinking on that is we have leadership in both caucuses who could direct their caucuses of kind of what to expect, and we could adopt them remotely and go from there. So if we wanted to go with a full remote session, for example.
Okay.
So
the fourth
playing out.
The fourth is normally ceremonial. That would be the first day of the session, and that's sworn in and take pictures and move on. So it certainly won't happen then. But usually very quickly afterwards, we would at the very least adopt the 2019 rules until we can approve the other rules.
Okay.
And that is so different from what we need in terms of COVID type things that it maybe is not as good of a solution as it has been in the past.
Okay.
I would agree with Pat. I think it's going to happen earlier because of that.
Okay. Well, good to know. So we still need to be paying attention. There's action that we can take probably early next week for the Rules Committee feedback and testifying on December 16th. So we'll have more information for that. Is there anything else that we need to be paying attention to or should be aware of at this stage regarding the rules?
I was going to look and see what other, the shall and may rule was the most offensive and the biggest. I think there was a little bit of remote participation attempted to be put into the bill or cleaned up a little bit in the bill, and I think that one was rejected in the House. And I think that's it. The others, you've got the major points in the House.
Okay. Anything in the Senate, Pat?
There were, as I think Jim may have referred to them earlier, kind of arcane procedural rules that I don't think anybody would be interested in. So no, I don't
Two
think
in
so.
the weeds?
Yeah, that's even more in the weeds. But I would say that it would be really helpful and really valuable if we could get support on our three proposals kind of in the order that I presented them as priorities on the 16th. I think it's hard to say really whether we're going to have any opportunity to get those passed. I don't know, but I think the whole situation is there's a lot of uncertainty, obviously with how COVID's developing and then how it's being manifest in this decision too. So I wouldn't rule anything out yet. And I think public testimony on this could really help. The bottom line for me is we should be planning for a legislative session that honors the public health recommendations of all of our experts. We know the Montana Nurses Association, St. Pete's and Helena have all asked us actually to meet remotely. They don't feel safe having us come into town. And a hybrid session that allows some legislators to participate remotely while others participate face-to-face really does not put us on equal footing.
Yeah.
It does give us the chance to vote, true, but does not put us on equal footing. So in my mind, that solution disenfranchises all the people that voted for those representatives at risk or that don't feel that's appropriate to participate in person. It really disenfranchises those voters because they're not having the same influence with their representative that they might otherwise. And also, I would say it's just common sense. I mean, this is just the right thing to do. This is not a complex decision. It should not be political. They've made the point that it's not political. If it's not political, then let's rely on the recommendations that we're getting from the professionals in our public health world. And we know what that is, and that's what we presented.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for framing that. Anything else, Tim? Yeah.
Well, I think that was extraordinarily well said, Pat. Thank you.
Thanks.
Glad you said that much better than I could say it. I think there is one other piece, and that is sort of the, I think Pat's talking about the big picture, and I think he's absolutely right that the focus should be on what is happening or the three options we gave that are sort of positive options. We take the opportunity to delay until there's a vaccination, or we make it completely remote, or we at least follow all the health protocols. What is a little bit of a danger is, I think, focusing on this panel, for example, which I absolutely despise, but focusing on that is a distraction in many ways. And so I think it's those other three concepts that are more important. The other thing that's in this same amendment with the panels is this whole deal about, well, yeah, sure, you can vote remotely on second, but not on third. You've immediately made everybody have to come to the building.
Right.
So it's a sort of sleight of hand to get a required presence, which, so there's focusing on the panel probably misses the other point.
Right.
And so that's why I think Pat's point was excellent. Let's support one of those three options.
Yeah, agreed. Well, yeah. I mean, just for me, it feels, again, one is reactive. It sets up a reactionary solution that isn't going to help anyone. While the three amendments proposed by Democrats are very proactive and engaged in finding solutions for right now to help everyone. And I also just want to say, I really appreciate, Pat, you've mentioned several times about equal footing and about being able, like, you're right, having a hybrid doesn't give us equal footing. And I hadn't thought about that until you said that. So I want everyone to be safe. I want, like, even the hard right Republicans, I want them to be safe. I want them to be healthy. I want Montana to be healthy. And we have to make the hard decision now so that we all can be healthy. I feel like we've gone too long now, but I really appreciate your time this afternoon and your insight and your public service. Thank you both so much. For anyone watching, we'll be doing things like this again. We'll be doing this throughout the session, probably shorter conversations during the session since time will be more limited for our elected officials, but we're trying to lay some groundwork, and they're educating me is really what's happening. So I appreciate it, and I really am grateful for everyone's time. Feel free to reach out to us if you have questions, message us on Facebook, send us an email, visit our website, gallatondemocrats.com. We'll also share more information about how you can submit public testimony or comment before December 16th for these proposed rule amendments, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.